The champagne hadn't even finished being poured when my mother grabbed the microphone. Not gently, not playfully. She took it out of my maid of honor's hand like she was correcting a mistake. "Before this goes any further," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through 200 guests and a string quartet, "I need to clear something up. My daughter is lying." The room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp. It froze. I was still standing beside my husband, bouquet in hand, lace pressed against my collarbone, and for a split second I thought maybe she would laugh and turn it into a joke. She didn't. "You didn't pay for this wedding yourselves," she continued. "We helped you. Don't stand there pretending you did it alone." My father stared at the table. My sister leaned back in her chair like she had been waiting for this exact moment. The air in the reception hall turned thick and metallic. "My name is Alina Mercer. I am 30 years old, and my wedding day was not the first time my mother tried to rewrite my life in public. It was simply the first time I was prepared for it. For as long as I can remember, my mother curated narratives. She didn't just attend events, she edited them. When I graduated college, she told relatives she carried me financially through tuition, even though I worked 2 jobs and paid my own loans. When I bought my first car, she told neighbors she co-signed. She didn't. When Ethan proposed, she told her friends she approved the match. Approval was never requested. She positioned herself as the architect of my milestones, the quiet benefactor behind my achievements. It was never about the money. It was about ownership. And tonight, she wanted ownership of my independence. 3 months earlier, Ethan and I made a decision that felt small at the time but would become the axis of everything that followed. We declined financial help for our wedding. Not because we didn't need it. Weddings are expensive. And we both worked stable but not extravagant jobs, but because we wanted clean edges. No leverage. No future sentences that started with, "After everything we did for you." We budgeted carefully. We cut guest lists. We chose a venue within our means. We tracked every vendor invoice in a shared spreadsheet. My mother offered to cover the floral arrangements. We declined. She offered to handle catering deposits. We declined. Each refusal seemed to irritate her more than the cost ever could have. The weeks leading up to the wedding were tense in small, almost invisible ways. My mother made comments at family dinners about how weddings always take more than couples realize. My father asked twice whether Ethan's job was stable enough long-term. My sister made jokes about how minimalist decor was code for budget. None of it was overtly hostile. It was layered, subtle, like someone sanding down the edges of your confidence without you noticing. Ethan and I sat in our hotel room surrounded by garment bags and seating charts. He noticed I was quiet. "She's going to try something," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. He had watched my mother for 3 years. He had seen the way she positioned herself at holidays, the way she corrected small details in front of others to reclaim attention. "We should prepare," he added. I nodded. We didn't anticipate a scene. We anticipated distortion. So we did something simple. We compiled documentation. Every payment confirmation, every bank transfer, every invoice receipt. We exported it to a folder. We saved voicemails. We prepared not to argue, but to clarify. When my mother grabbed the mic at the reception, I felt the preparation settle into place like armor. "You know very well we helped pay for this," she said into the microphone. "I don't know why you're pretending. Otherwise." She turned toward the guests as if inviting them into her version of the story. "We've always supported our daughter." A murmur rippled through the room. I could feel eyes moving between us, assessing body language, searching for truth in posture. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I looked at Ethan. He stepped forward calmly, the way he does when a classroom of teenagers gets loud and he doesn't need to raise his voice to regain control. He slipped his hand into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Actually," he said evenly, "we expected there might be confusion." He connected the phone to the reception hall's projector system that had been set up earlier for the slideshow. The large screen behind us flickered to life. A spreadsheet appeared. Clean, Organized, time-stamped, payment confirmations, highlighted in blue. Every invoice, Ethan continued. Every deposit, every vendor contract, paid directly from our joint account. The room went silent in a way that felt physical. My mother's face tightened. That proves nothing, she said quickly. We gave you cash. Ethan didn't flinch. Then you won't mind if we play this? He tapped a screen again. An audio file began to play through the hall speakers. My mother's voice filled the room. If anyone asks, just say we helped pay. It looks better that way. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear silverware shift on plates. A chair scraped lightly against the floor. My father's breathing was audible from where I stood. My mother's grip on the microphone tightened, knuckles pale. You recorded me? She demanded. You sent it, Ethan replied calmly. Voicemail. In that moment, something changed permanently. It wasn't explosive. It was structural. The narrative my mother had curated for decades fractured publicly. For years, she had been able to reposition facts in real time because no one challenged them. Tonight, documentation did the challenging. I stepped forward then and gently took the microphone from her hand. My voice didn't shake. We didn't want to embarrass anyone, I said softly. We just wanted honesty. I turned toward the guests. We paid for this wedding ourselves, not because we don't love our family, but because we wanted independence without conditions. I paused, letting that sentence land. We're grateful for emotional support, but we're not sponsored. A few guests lowered their eyes. Others nodded subtly. 6 people stood quietly and left the room. Not dramatically, just quietly. My mother stared at me like she was trying to recognize who I had become. My father didn't defend her. He didn't defend me either. He simply sat there, silent, watching the story he had tolerated for years unravel. My sister finally spoke, her voice brittle. You could have handled this privately. I met her gaze. So could she. The bandleader cleared his throat gently and asked if he should resume. I nodded. Dinner is served, I said evenly. The music started again, hesitant at first, then louder. Conversations resumed, but the tone had shifted. Not scandalized, not chaotic, just aware. My mother left the reception early. My father stayed. He didn't approach me. He didn't apologize, but he also didn't leave. He watched as Ethan and I danced, as friends laughed, as the celebration continued without her narration overlaying it. Later that night, when the last guest had gone and the venue lights dimmed, Ethan squeezed my hand and said quietly, You didn't fight her. I looked at him and smiled faintly. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. The strongest correction isn't louder than the lie. It's documented beyond it, and that was only the beginning. The morning after the wedding, the silence was louder than the music had been. The hotel suite felt smaller somehow, as if the confrontation from the night before had compressed the air. My phone was already buzzing by the time I opened my eyes. Notifications, text messages, missed calls. My mother had sent 11 messages between midnight and 6 a.m. My sister had sent 3. My father had sent none. That absence was deliberate. I sat up slowly, the lace of my dress folded neatly over the chair, and opened the first message from my mother. You humiliated me. The second, after everything I've done for you. The third, I hope you're proud. I read them without reacting, the same way I read financial reports, line by line, without emotion attached to each number. The pattern was familiar. Deflection, reframing, self-victimization. The audio recording had not embarrassed her because it was false. It embarrassed her because it was accurate. Ethan watched me from the edge of the bed. How bad? He asked. Predictable, I replied calmly. I scrolled further. My sister's messages were shorter. You didn't have to destroy her like that. She was trying to help. That word again. Help. The same help that came with strings woven so tightly they could suffocate a future. I closed my phone and let it rest on the nightstand. This isn't over, Ethan said quietly. He was right. Weddings end. Narratives don't. By noon, the first ripple reached beyond our phones. A cousin posted a vague status update about toxic parents and adult children, and aunt texted to say she never knew the full story. Word spreads quickly in families that survive on carefully edited versions of reality. The next call came from my father. I answered this one. He didn't waste time with greetings. "We need to talk," he said. Not angry, not apologetic, just controlled. I told him we could meet at their house that afternoon. I wanted the conversation in the space where so many others had been staged. When we arrived, my mother was already seated at the dining table, posture rigid, hands folded like she was waiting for a verdict. My father stood by the window, staring at the backyard. My sister hovered near the kitchen entrance. No one offered congratulations for the wedding. No one mentioned the ceremony. The room felt like a boardroom before a merger negotiation. "You blindsided us," my mother began. I met her gaze evenly. "You grabbed a microphone," I said. In front of 200 people, she flinched slightly. My father turned slowly from the window. "The recording was unnecessary," he said. "It was precautionary," Ethan replied calmly before I could answer. My father looked at him sharply. "This is between me and my daughter." Ethan didn't step back. "It became my business when you questioned our integrity publicly," he said. The tension shifted. My father wasn't used to being addressed without deference. He had spent decades operating as the final voice in every room, but something about the previous night had fractured that position. "Why didn't you just tell us you were sensitive about it?" my mother asked. Sensitive. I almost smiled. "Because it wasn't about sensitivity," I replied. "It was about truth." She shook her head. "We only wanted people to know we supported it." You wanted people to think you funded it," I corrected. That landed heavily. Silence stretched between us, long enough for discomfort to surface. My father moved to the head of the table and sat down. "You embarrassed your mother," he said again. "You embarrassed me first," I replied calmly. "You laughed." He inhaled slowly. I didn't think it mattered. That sentence carried more weight than any accusation. I leaned forward slightly. It mattered to me. My sister finally stepped into the conversation. "Mom's reputation means something," she said. "So does mine," I answered. "So does his," I added, nodding toward Ethan. "And so does the truth." The discussion shifted then, not emotionally, but strategically. My father asked what I wanted. Not rhetorically, seriously. It was the first time he'd framed it that way. I didn't hesitate. "Acknowledgement," I said. "Publicly." My mother stiffened. "You want an apology tour?" she asked. "No," I replied. "I want correction." The difference mattered. You don't get to claim sponsorship for things you didn't finance. My father looked at the table for a long moment. "And if we refuse?" he asked quietly. I held his gaze. Then I stopped protecting other things quietly. That shifted the atmosphere entirely. For years, I had handled more than tuition and wedding budgets. I had reviewed my father's business contracts when he asked casually. I had flagged compliance risks when he expanded his warehouse. I had reorganized debt when his supplier shifted terms unexpectedly. None of it was documented as my contribution. None of it was acknowledged publicly, but it existed, and I knew it. My father understood the implication immediately. "You leverage that?" he asked. "I'd stop stabilizing it," I replied evenly. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly as he recalculated. Pride and practicality have always wrestled in him. This time, practicality won. "What do you want us to say?" he asked. My mother turned sharply toward him. "Harold." He raised a hand gently, not angrily, just decisively. "I want you to correct what you said," I answered. "Not for drama, for accuracy." The room was silent. My sister looked uncomfortable for the first time. My mother's hands trembled slightly. "Fine," she said finally. "We'll say it." The words were clipped, but they were there. My father nodded once. "We will." 2 days later, my mother posted on social media. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't elaborate. but it was clear. Correction. Alina and Ethan fully funded their wedding themselves. We are proud of their independence. It was brief, but it traveled. The same network that had quietly absorbed her version now saw the revision. My father commented beneath it, proud of our daughter's hard work. That sentence mattered more than the post itself. But something else shifted quietly in the weeks that followed. Invitations to family gatherings changed tone. Conversations adjusted. My sister stopped referencing our family support when discussing milestones. My father began asking my opinion before making public statements, not because I demanded it, because the previous misstep had shown him what assumption costs. Still, consequences ripple longer than moments. At the next extended family dinner, my aunt approached me privately. "You were brave," she said. I shook my head. I was prepared. That was the truth. The microphone wasn't the turning point. The documentation was. One evening about a month after the wedding, my father called unexpectedly. "Come by," he said. When I arrived, he was sitting in his office with a stack of papers in front of him. "I've been reviewing our business filings," he said quietly. "There are things you've corrected over the years I never acknowledged." I didn't respond immediately. "I should have," he added. That sentence was not dramatic, but it was real. He handed me a folder. My father called me into his office at the warehouse, not to review contracts, not to correct a filing, to sit in on a meeting. A supplier had challenged pricing terms publicly at a regional association event. My father, who once handled every confrontation through volume and intimidation, asked me to attend as compliance oversight. That wasn't normal. That was structural change. At the event, I watched my father introduce me differently. "This is my daughter. She handles our compliance and risk review." Not "she's a teacher," not "she works at a school," not silence. Handles compliance and risk. Language matters. During the supplier dispute, when the conversation began drifting toward vague commitments and handshake agreements, I stepped in calmly and referenced the clause I had helped rewrite 3 months earlier. The room shifted. Not because I was loud, because I was correct. Afterward, in the parking lot, my father turned to me and said something I hadn't expected. "I used to think respect came from control," he said quietly. I waited. "It comes from competence," he added. That sentence closed something inside me that had been open for years. But the story wasn't finished, because family narratives rarely unwind in a straight line. 2 Sundays later, during a larger extended family gathering, Brooke stood up mid-conversation and announced something. She had been offered a promotion. Senior financial analyst, salary bump, relocation option. Everyone clapped. My mother beamed. My father nodded approvingly. And then Brooke added, I almost didn't take it. The room quieted slightly. She looked at me directly. I almost stayed comfortable because it was easier. I didn't react. She continued. But I realized something recently. If you let other people define your value long enough, you start believing them. That wasn't aimed at me. It was acknowledgement. Public, subtle, but real. The table shifted again. Not explosively, incrementally. My mother looked between us like she was recalibrating her daughters in real time. For years, she had unconsciously ranked us by income, prestige, visibility. Now she was witnessing a different metric. Boundaries, clarity, structure. Later that evening, when most guests had left, my mother approached me alone in the kitchen. I didn't realize how much you were carrying, she said quietly. You didn't ask, I replied gently. She nodded. You don't need to carry it alone anymore. That wasn't apology. It was recognition. And recognition is quieter than remorse, but more durable. Months passed. The dynamic in our family didn't become perfect. It became transparent. My father stopped making public jokes about careers. My mother stopped positioning herself as silent benefactor. Brooke stopped measuring herself against me and started measuring herself against her own growth. That shift didn't happen overnight. It happened in small conversations, in pauses where comparison used to live, in the absence of sarcasm where it once thrived. For years, we had existed in quiet competition, not because I wanted to, but because our household rewarded contrast. She was the visible success. I was the practical one. She had titles. I had quiet work. And the moment that microphone exposed my mother's narrative manipulation, it didn't just correct a lie. It removed the invisible scoreboard we had both been unconsciously playing on. Brooke began talking differently about her job, less about promotions, more about what she was learning. She stopped introducing me as my teacher sister in a tone that sounded apologetic. She started saying, my sister works in education leadership. Words matter. Framing matters. And when someone stops reducing you, it changes how they reduce themselves. And I stopped shrinking. That part was less visible, but far more important. For years, I had edited myself in family rooms, lowered my voice, softened my achievements, laughed at comments that felt like paper cuts. I thought humility meant silence. I thought maturity meant endurance. But what I finally understood was this. Endurance without boundaries becomes permission. And once you give permission long enough, people stop asking. The night of my wedding wasn't about revenge. It was about a recalibration of what I would and would not absorb publicly. And once I experienced what it felt like to let documentation speak for me instead of apology, I realized I never wanted to go back. One evening, nearly 6 months after the wedding, I was invited to speak at a state educator leadership summit. The email arrived mid-afternoon, while I was reviewing a district grant proposal at my kitchen table. It wasn't a flashy invitation. It was structured, respectful, direct. They wanted me to speak about systemic literacy gaps and sustainable intervention models, the same work my father once dismissed as babysitting. I forwarded the invitation to my family without commentary. My father called me an hour later. When is it? He asked. Not sarcastically, not skeptically, just asked. There was no smirk in his tone, no defensive laughter, just interest. I told him the date. I'll come, he said. It wasn't dramatic, it was steady. And that was the difference. The laugh at the kitchen table months ago had been reflex. This was intentional. The mic at my wedding had been a moment. A sharp correction in a room full of witnesses. But what followed was architecture. Architecture is slower, quieter. It rebuilds framing. It reinforces weight-bearing beams. It removes unstable supports. My father began asking my opinion before signing vendor contracts. My mother stopped narrating my life to guests without checking facts first. Brooke called me once just to ask how I structure long-term planning without burning out. It wasn't dramatic reconciliation. It was functional alignment. And that kind of shift lasts longer than emotional apologies. But there was one final piece neither of them fully understood yet. Because while they were adjusting to a new narrative about me, the capable daughter, the composed professional, the one who didn't yell but didn't yield, I had already rewritten something bigger. Correction without separation becomes dependency again. And dependency quietly erodes boundaries. The final boundary didn't happen at a family dinner or in my father's office. It happened quietly on a Tuesday morning, while I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing a new district grant proposal. My phone buzzed with a notification from my accountant confirming something I'd set in motion months earlier. For years, I had been listed as secondary financial guarantor on my parents' business credit extension, a quiet safety net my father leaned on without acknowledging it. When his construction contracts tightened or seasonal cash flow dipped, my credit profile stabilized the renewal terms. I hadn't allowed it initially because foreclosure once felt imminent, and I couldn't stand the thought of watching everything collapse. But protection without recognition becomes invisible obligation. An invisible obligation breeds quiet resentment. I never told anyone I had started the process to remove myself from that structure. Not in anger, not as retaliation, but because I finally understood that correction without separation is just repetition waiting to happen. The revised filings were complete. My name was no longer attached to their liabilities. The holding company remained intact under equal governance, but my personal assets were no longer cushioning family risk. I stared at the confirmation email for a long moment, not with triumph, but with relief. It felt like taking off a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. For the first time in my adult life, my stability was not structurally dependent on their decisions. That weekend, at another extended family gathering, my father raised his glass again. Not theatrically, not performatively. I used to think leadership meant protecting everyone from consequences, he said calmly. Now I understand it means facing them. The room was quiet, but not tense. My mother stood beside him, not behind him. Brooke caught my eye and gave a small nod. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no confessions, no forced reconciliation, but something irreversible had settled into place. They no longer saw me as the daughter who needed managing. They saw me as the adult who set terms, calmly, clearly, and without apology. Later that night, my father asked to speak privately on the porch. The air was cool, the kind of early fall temperature that makes you notice change without discomfort. You removed your name from the credit extension, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, I replied evenly. He studied me for a long moment. That's fair, he said. There was no accusation in his tone, no wounded pride, just acceptance. You don't owe us that kind of insurance, he added. That sentence mattered more than any apology he could have crafted. For years, my role in the family had been structural reinforcement without recognition. Now it was voluntary collaboration with boundaries. I'm not stepping away, I said gently. I'm standing correctly. He nodded slowly, absorbing that distinction. I should have seen you sooner, he said. I didn't respond with forgiveness or condemnation. I responded with honesty. You're seeing me now. That was enough. The following month, at the Regional Education Summit, my father and my mother sat in the audience, not in the front row as sponsors, not backstage as contributors, just seated, listening. When I finished my talk about literacy, equity, and long-term student confidence metrics, my father clapped. Not louder than anyone else, not longer, just steady. Afterward, he shook my hand instead of patting my shoulder. That small shift said more than a speech ever could. It was equality, not hierarchy. The irony was that I didn't win anything new in this final chapter. No additional award, no dramatic legal reveal, no public spectacle. What I gained was alignment. The microphone moment had exposed distortion. The documentation had corrected it, but the final step was distance without hostility, boundaries without exile, structure without resentment. That is what made it permanent. Months later, at Thanksgiving, my seat was already set when I arrived. No one commented on it. No one referenced the past. The turkey smelled the same. The table looked the same. But the energy was different. Not because I demanded space, because I claimed it. And that's the truth. No one at that wedding understood. When my mother grabbed the microphone, the strongest response isn't volume. It's stability. It's documentation. It's refusing to shrink for someone else's comfort. I didn't need to win the room. I needed to stop surrendering it. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. Ever.